Okay. But there should be enough room.
Real people, real stage, and a lot of people actually that we have met online, and for the first time we're actually seeing here today here in Vienna. Welcome everyone. For those that don't know me, my name is Frank Oefen. I started the foundation about 11 years ago now, because we had a great and emerging crisis in the Netherlands for students because they couldn't find enough housing. And so this was the reason why we brought people together at that time in Amsterdam. It was a very, very early phase for the industry, not that many players. And in the last 10 years, the class has basically seen this sector grow and has been hosting, with your generous support, events like this today to basically help students with better student accommodation options. And I'm super, super proud that the team today, again, brought all of us here together, and also for those that are following this online, that we have this hybrid option now, so we can all see it also afterwards, but also for those that couldn't make it to Vienna today, can follow it live here. Kelly already mentioned it. It is a session today with lots of different program components. We have inspiration, we have data, we have conversation, and this sort of overarching theme for this session was student mobility. And I think you will find in this city in particular a lot of the trends that are reshaping our higher education markets and our student accommodation markets across Europe. And today we also saw some amazing examples of how student accommodation can really provide and enhance the student experience. The site tours that we did this morning, for those that were here in town, have always been a treasured tradition of the class conference. It was something that we always did the day before the class conference happened itself, and it gave everyone an opportunity to show the best of what has happened in student accommodation in the city, but also to learn from each other, like, you know, how do you shape a shared kitchen? What kind of common spaces do we have? How do you do the pricing? What kind of internet provider do you use here? What kind of key system do you have here? And so a lot of practical things that were really, really important for those that are active in the industry, not just only in the investment side, but also on the operational side. So we added that to the regional forums, and today was our premiere, and I think it was a big success. We saw some amazing properties that showed like the best in class of already, you know, the sustainability, the policy, but also a lot of the social side. And I think the last 2 years we've talked a lot about it, making sure that the students are okay, that they are well, and that we support them has been extremely important. As you know, I'm also part of the student hotel group, and we have a property here that we opened during the COVID period. It was a time that basically not much was happening. The students thankfully arrived, but a lot of them were studying in those spaces. We have about 600 students here, and as everybody was really happy to go back to universities, unfortunately something else happened. And this is also something that I will talk to later today with Gerrit about. But what we see here in Vienna and see in many university cities is that students from the Ukraine, students from Russia were immediately impacted, and the impact was felt in the residences. At the student hotel, we had over 100 Russian students here in Vienna and 90 students from the Ukraine. And a lot of them were living and sharing the same kitchen. So you can imagine that also for our team to make sure that those people that often came to this city to feel free, to be, to choose the life that they wanted, that this is an extremely challenging period, not just for themselves, but also the communities and the people that help them here. So I'm super proud that so many of us also are doing extra efforts to not just make sure that those students are okay, but also to accommodate a lot of the refugees that are currently in cities like Vienna. This is the first regional offline, so to say, the first one of a series. Today we're going to talk about the DACH market, especially about Germany and Austria. Those are some of the most dynamic markets in this region. But we will also go later this year to the Netherlands, where we will talk about the Benelux market. This coincides with the Provada on June 16th in Amsterdam, hosted by our partner Loyens Louvre. And then we will have a session in Milan for the Italian market, which is also super exciting. A lot of great projects have opened there. That will happen also in July. And after the summer, we will be in London, where some of you have also a lot of projects, but there's also a lot of reasons to come together there because it's always one of the top markets. As you know, then the big conference is going to be in Madrid in November. Very, very exciting as well. It's one of the most dynamic cities in the Iberian Peninsula, so lots of good reasons to go there. And all of this has not been possible without the support of some of our partners. In particular here today, I would like to thank Glide, being the fantastic sponsor, not just for this session, but for this part of the program, and also Greystar, and some of you are here, so looking forward to catch up later. Another special partner for this session is Talent Garden. We're here at their Vienna campus, and I'd like to share a little bit of background about Talent Garden, because unfortunately they couldn't tell that story themselves today. But why I think Talent Garden is very interesting for student accommodation in general is because they went through an evolution that we have seen as well. And that's what the class always called it, the blending trend. Talent Garden started in Italy, in a country where a lot of people struggle to find their first job opportunities, let alone to start a business. And Davide Dattoli was a very visionary and very, very ambitious change maker that said that he needed to create places where these people could come together, contra all the other trends of like people saying like there was no opportunity to start business in Italy. And he has been doing this and doing it really, really well. You see today this place is full of startups. There's lots of big corporations that also have a little outlet here, and they're directly working with a lot of young talent. And I really encourage you to get to know them better, because I think they're one of those places that student accommodation complements. There are a lot of people that here need accommodation for their interns, for young professionals, and I can tell that collaborating with them is great, and we're very, very thankful that they wanted to host us here. What's also interesting about their business model, and then I'll go back to student accommodation, is that they started as co-working, but they saw that a lot of the extra value that they created was something that lacked in the traditional education industry. For example, digital skill sets is something that is in major, major demand, but it's not necessarily what students at the moment receive in their traditional bachelor and master degrees. So they jumped into this opportunity. You will be able here to get a free month digital marketing degree. You will be able to do digital skill sets improvement throughout the year with your company or individually. So it's really interesting that they not only provide co-working space, but also learn experiences. Bon. What else? We're going to have sessions here, as I said, for inspiration, to also make you understand the market at the moment from different perspectives. We will start with Herbert Hetzel, who is, I think, an ambassador for many things, but among others for the city of Vienna. He will share his insight, and I will ask Harold Huber later to introduce him. I will go in conversation with Gerrit Bruno from study.eu about student mobility. James from Savills will share the latest data on the student accommodation markets here in Austria and Germany. And then we will have a panel conversation. So with that, I would like to ask Harold to introduce Herbert. And I'll see you in a bit. Thank you.
Sorry, do you want to just say one thing? Hi, for those that are at home, we have some polls that have just been put up, so it would be great if you could tell us where you're from and why you're here. We'd love to hear from you.
So, my name is Harold Hubel, and I've got the pleasure to introduce Herbert. And Frank, you gave me, I think, 30 seconds to start the preparation for that. But it's an interesting one, because I think some of you might know that I'm Viennese by heart, and I'm very proud of it. I've been born and raised in the city, and actually that's a district in Vienna that I'm living very close by. I was in grammar school very close here as well. And that Vienna is also what brought, I think, Frank and the class together many, many years in Amsterdam. Because when we started with student housing in 2013 for Value One Group and Milestone, one of your colleagues called me and said, "Can you get Alexander van der Bellen to a conference?" And I was thinking like, okay, yes, Vienna, very, very well known Green Party at the time. And I said, okay, we'll try. I mean, it's Vienna. There's never more than 2 people distance between people. We'll call him up. We got Mr. van der Bellen to Amsterdam. He enjoyed it a lot. He spoke to the city there. As some of you might know, he's been a professor, has been done a study how important for the city of Vienna the 190,000 students of the city actually are. So he's done some research because that's what he was. And years later, he became Austrian president, the first Green Party president. And that brings the long story to Herbert. Because a couple of years ago, Mr. Alexander van der Bellen had an issue. He had the Swiss president coming over to Vienna, and so I was like, okay, what do we show her? And they decided to go to Viertel 2, where one of the Milestone houses is, and show the energy system that Herbert and his team has built there. And I do call Herbert an environmental evangelist. He will never likes me for that. But I think, and he will describe it a little bit, there is an enormous wide range of ideas that you have come up over the years on the energy side, thinking ahead light years and implementing a lot of things that very leading technical universities in abroad also trying to copy, and a lot of it is changing as well. So he'll give you a little bit of insight. He's managed to explain it to me, so probably it's easy to follow. And so that's kind of trying to go from Vienna to energy and introducing Herbert as well on the energy and sustainability side. And I'll pass on the microphone to you.
So, thank you very much. Hopefully my presentation will last a little longer than the introduction. Yeah? Okay. So, well, I did read the headlines for my presentation, and it said Visions for Vienna. I have to change it a little. I would like to change it to Visions out of Vienna. I have no big visions for Vienna, yeah, because I'm Viennese as Harald is. I was also born in this city and I love it and I like to stay here. I was many years abroad and I enjoyed very much coming back. It's a very livable city. I think what we always overlook, we the Viennese, what we always overlook, it's not such a big city. So it's a small town actually. Everybody knows each other more or less, and it's a very interesting infrastructure we see here. I would like to show you in short words where I come from. So I'm a long-term entrepreneur in the real estate world. I had many roles, many jobs, many projects, big projects, small projects. I have in-depth knowledge of project management. And what I'm very proud of, beside many other things, I'm co-founder of Milestone Living, Student Living, and also co-founder of Beyond Carbon Energy. So I know something about real estate. I know something about operating of buildings, and I have a little knowledge about the energy issue. It was funny when I heard that 11 years ago, 13 years ago, you started the class. It was the same time when we started with Milestone in Vienna, more or less by accident. We had a student house that had to be operated, and we had a kind of idea how we wanted it to have, and there was no operator who did it the way we intended it to do. So we founded our own operator, and we've been very proud because our first student housing was built and run without subsidies. It was not necessary that you had to apply in person to get a student apartment there. We developed multiple services with a simple price structure. We've been very proud that those new things could be implemented because this did not exist at that time in Vienna. And it's just 10 years ago. Today we don't think about those issues. Yeah, that's standard all over the world. I mean, so things obviously have changed in this business. Student housing as a business grew up, changed. I have the impression 50 years, the 50 years before that, nothing changed. That was a kind of protected area. And suddenly it became a business. It became a business for real estate developers. It became a business for operators. And the opportunities for the students changed dramatically. So, but what changed in the meantime? What I learned is that if you are studying and trying to get your degrees without going abroad somewhere and to be there 1, 2, 3 years, this study is more or less only half value. So going international was something we had to implement also in our student life. Yeah, there have been a big effort just to answer this question that the students always have when they want to change places for half a year. What's that organizational wise? What does this mean for the operator? Then suddenly we've been confronted with the digital university issue due to Corona or whatever. And they studied from at home. They didn't visit our student houses anymore, or they did, but they had different demands than they had before. They had to be fulfilled. We have seen in the last 10 years a tremendous development in the startup culture, especially in the area where the students are related, because more or less while they do their studying, at the same time they are incorporated or inventing startup companies, founding the startup companies. They even haven't finished their studies yet. Yeah, so I've not seen that before. So I think this is quite a big change in system, and somehow we start focusing on sustainability. Okay, for going international, we found some solutions. Yeah, exchange programs being intensified. I love Gary is here, who is running Milestone. I liked your idea about holiday swapping for students, so they can change from one house to the other house all over Europe if they want to stay 2 weeks, 4 weeks there. And I love this idea. We supported, or Gary supported, to learn a language, to get connected to the local culture. Language always is helpful. We solved many issues regarding the digital university on the technical side, or even by community building, because they've not been here, how to keep connected to them. All this could be solved by the operator. Even we supported specific programs regarding startup or startup culture, or connection to investors or promoters. But what did we do on sustainability? 70% of the students think that sustainability is a big issue. For them, climate change is a big issue. When we started our first milestone, we didn't know about Fridays for Future. So, where did this come from suddenly? Yeah, where comes this mind shift? Suddenly, students are not eating meat anymore. They are not even getting a driving license. They are not thinking about having a car, they're not making a driving license. So what changed there? I have the impression 10, 15, 20 years ago, students have been very similar to myself, even that I was old then already. Yeah? But the gap was not as big then as it is today between them, my mindset, and their mindset. Their values, my values, they are suddenly tremendous different. And the biggest issue on that is sustainability. Well, I think everybody knows this chart. So it more or less says we will not achieve this goal from 1.5 centigrades temperature change, and so therefore we lost the battle on climate change. So I think that's obvious for everybody who can read. So this is the situation where we are in. We know now since 30 years there has been the issue of climate change. It could have been solved cheap in those 30 years. Now it's going to be expensive. So, what does this mean for our holistic situation of student house? The stakeholders in a student house, there's on one side the real estate developer who has eventually an investor once it's finished and running. We have an operator, and more or less we have the students. And beside the operator we have all those service units who try to supply somehow this system. What we saw is, with our own projects, that the main issue regarding sustainability is heating and cooling. Heating and cooling in real estate is responsible for more than 40% of the greenhouse gases worldwide. So it's not traffic, it's not industry, it's heating and cooling. And if we can change anything to have an impact, then it's heating and cooling. And it's not making green facades. It's not planting trees. Yeah, that's good. But it's not going to make an impact. The impact is we have to get the greenhouse gases out of heating and cooling. So the challenge, we want to have a carbon-free heating and cooling, but everything, every pipe, every line, everything we get cross-border, we can't influence how much carbon is in. I mean, it's quite easy. If you get gas cross-border, then it's not to be discussed if or if not. But when you look in different cities, in the local heating distribution systems they have there, you will be astonished where the heat comes from that they send to your house. It's quite astonishing. So once you have an in-depth look in that, you will find that what you get cross-border may be not as clean as you expect that. And what we changed from our point of view is, up to now, real estate has been just an energy consumer. And we had an energy provider who provided the energy, and the other one was the energy consumer, and had to pay for this consumption. And we tried to change this perspective. Our real estate is not only a consumer, it's also a producer. And the very best thing is, this real estate can be a tremendous energy storage. The problem is that real estate developers usually try to get this decision regarding the energy supply very easy. So they are used to call an energy provider and tell him, please provide me with the energy needed. At the end of the day, it has to be done. He has many other problems. This is just one of those problems. Please solve my energy issue. Bring it here. The real estate developer is not so keen about all the systems, all the system costs of this energy supply, as at the end of the day he wants to sell it, hopefully to an investor. And anyhow, he's not going to pay more or less the heating and cooling on site, because if he's lucky, Gary is going to pay that as an operator. There are different contracts, management contracts, operation, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, the developer doesn't think very much about this energy. What we do with Beyond Carbon Energy, we implement in those projects carbon-free heating and cooling at market costs. And this took us a lot of effort to get it done at market costs, because we found out nobody is going to pay the extra costs, if there would be any. So they don't feel the pain I feel. So therefore, if it's not at the same price than local heating and cooling, we could not sell it. The technical solution is simple. I'm always afraid when I'm showing this picture, because it's like Mickey Mouse, yeah? We have a seasonal energy storage. That's a key element. This seasonal energy storage is nothing else than geothermal deep probes, many of them. They are deep about 100, 150, sometimes 200 meters, depends on the site. And when we cool the building in summer, then we produce extra heat. That's normal. When you do cooling, you produce heat. This heat, during the summertime, we send into our seasonal storage. And with this heat, we heat in winter. And that's it. It's not more complicated than this. We have a seasonal energy storage where the outcome, the heat outcome from the cooling is saved for winter heating. So at the top of this energy storage, there's somewhere a heat pump, and this can be low temperature, high temperature, whatever. We make warm water with that for the shower and everything. But this is possible. And it's not only a story, we've done it. Our first project in Viertel 2 here in Vienna has the size of 120,000 square meters. And this was our test project, our laboratory. Yes, we made a lot of mistakes, and yes, we learned a lot, and no, not everything went well. But it works. It works, and we are not bankrupt. We still can pay the salaries of our employees. Yeah? And the outcome is, it's carbon-free. No, we don't are totally independent. Yeah? We invest in PV, we invest in wind, we invest in thermal, solar thermal, and we integrate that in our system. There are projects where we can't put as much PV on top as we would like to. Then we have to buy electricity, especially in winter time. Okay, so we buy carbon-free electricity. We just pay the little added price for the carbon-free electricity. That's not so much. Yeah? That's the price we pay to keep it carbon-free. And that's it. So it's not a technical challenge. At the moment now we have more than 1 million square meters under contract. Different buildings, new buildings, old buildings refurbished, old buildings not refurbished, residential offices, you name it, we run it. And what do we gain from that? We gain carbon reduction, energy is generated on site. So I mean, I don't like to have a war in Europe, yeah, but this is a discussion we are running now very intensively. We have low maintenance and operating costs because the installations are trivial. It's a long-lasting installation because the deep probes we make, they don't get old. So my expectation is in 100 years they will still work because there's what should change them. The energy costs are not related to the energy market because this much electricity I'm going to buy to produce a huge amount of heating and warming. So if I have any index on my heating costs, it's for sure not related to the energy markets and the volatilities that I see there. It's a transparent and simple pricing structure. I can do cooling without any air pollution. We are talking about in cities, especially about urban heat effects and legionellas due to cooling systems. Here I can do that without chillers. I have a low temperature system which is highest energy efficient because I have no energy losses. And it is very easy adaptable to any changes in the building. And this is what we are going to focus in the next step. I'm very, very sure that we will see the usage of buildings in the time where we see those buildings standing in our cities, they will change. They changed in the last 200 years, so who thinks that it's not going to change in the next 50 to 100 years? Our demands to comfort, our demands to our surrounding changes all the time. So we will see also for the real estate changing demands. The houses we built, and I know what I'm talking about because we face the same problems with our projects. The houses we built, they are very hard to be changed. It's easier to change one of those old houses you see out there. And there are many good reasons why that is still a very expensive living and residential place in Vienna, because they can be changed to future demands. Yeah? What we also get is, we get synergies if we enjoy a load shift between buildings. So if we erect a hotel and a student house at the nearby or neighboring, or if there is anyone using and producing energy nearby, I can gain something with a load shift, and this helps with the investment costs and the running costs. We have the possibility to think of flat rate solutions, which I think will be the very, very future. Flat rate, meaning that energy is incorporated in the rent, also for the building. With our system, we know already what energy will cost for everybody. And I think this is a big issue. Once we reinvested our investment, we can make any energy price. Because once it's reinvested, it's paid. And we support best ESG and taxonomy reports. I think this is a big issue regarding real estate developers. To give you one last, I have to shorten my presentation, I think, due to the schedule, but to give you one idea why we have to work so intensively together and not everyone in his box. This is the line of the energy need by norm that the developer has to build. The norm situation asks for those 4,603 kilowatt installed heating. The developer does this. He doesn't mind if it's necessary or not, but he does this because if he has to sell the building to any investor, in the due diligence, it may not come out that he did not fulfill this norm. And then he doesn't care anymore. This red line is the energy that is needed by the operation of the building. This is our project. These are the numbers out of our project. And if it says here minus 64%, at the same time it means we invested double as necessary, totally useless. The engines we have implemented there, they don't run optimized, and therefore the running costs for this little energy for the operator or for the tenant are as high as if we would have built this stupid thing here. We could save 50% on the investment costs for these technical systems if we would look deeper into the norms that we just fulfill because they are there. And this only can be solved if the real estate developer, the operator, and the energy provider sit together and say, well, we make a package. We make a package that is more intelligent than anything we did in the past. As long as everybody stays in his box, nothing will change. If everyone stays in his box, organizations will be the same, responsibilities will be the same, so solutions are the same. If we don't jump out of that box, we will not be able to develop new solutions. And in these new solutions, I think it's quite easy to fulfill our sustainability goals. It's not complicated. So look abroad the, how do you say, Tellerrand? Yeah, think out of the box. Get connected and develop something new. That's I think, my main issue. Otherwise, we really lost the battle. Yeah. We are facing a lot of new challenges. They all can also only be solved by thinking out of the box. Mobility will change. Our care business will change. There are a lot of things that our students will be cared by the operator in future. And I'm sure we have to work together with those care providers. And flexibility is the main character of sustainability. If your buildings are not flexible, if you look similar to this one, you have to rethink if you're really flexible in your house. You enjoyed Vienna, I hope. Vienna is a very livable city. I don't have to tell you how many students live here, and how many universities we have. But here are some numbers. I think they show there's more than universities and student hostels that keeps students in Vienna. We don't have an ocean, but we have 45 kilometers of beach length in Vienna. This is the number I like the most because it even surprises me every time. And we have, in a year, 3,500 theater and opera events. In a year. So I think this gives you an impression there are more things to be seen in Vienna than student houses. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, no, it's okay. You were fine, actually, just on time. So, well, yeah, the big round of applause again. Thank you so much for that wonderful chat. Also, I hope you all get the time. It's my first time in Vienna. I'll get the time to explore a little bit and, see what he's been on about. So, up next we have a fantastic conversation between Frank Uffen, and we have some stage moving in the background, and Gerrit from Studied EU, and they're going to be having a discussion on student mobility and internationalization. So, up next is Frank and Gerrit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Gerrit and I had many conversations online, also with uni during the COVID, first year of the COVID pandemic. And the reason was that we needed people basically to make us understand what was going on at the universities. So we called upon people that were following students at the universities, but also people that saw basically what students were doing online. And Gerrit was one of the entrepreneurs in this field with Study.eu that could basically predict already if the students were changing their decisions about where they were going to go, what they were looking at, because he was following them online. And this was one of the things that really, really helped us in those crazy first weeks when everything was locked up and unclear and nobody knew what was going to happen. So thank you again for helping us in those days from Hamburg at that time.
Still in Hamburg. And by the way, pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to Vienna, one of my favorite cities. I've heard it's got a lot of great beaches.
I was also surprised, but I thought maybe in the future, when the water will rise, Vienna will actually be on the beach.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunities for high-rise buildings, I've heard. Also, thank you that you think we can predict anything. So we can give you insight into what students are looking for, that's true. Study.eu is a study choice platform where students look for programs in universities, and the cycle that we usually see is 12 to 18 months in advance. That's a typical. So if someone's looking today at maybe studying in Germany or Austria, they're likely to be wanting to enroll next year, for example.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Herbert, thanks again for your presentation. I think one of the topics that you raised before we go into the student mobility question is also how sustainability and policy are impacting us at the same time. And also in the Netherlands, where policy reform is one of the topics for the regional reform, we see a lot related to energy. Not just the cost, a lot of us offer also include energy included in the price, but also that regulatory frameworks are often not really keeping up with the innovation in the sector. So thank you very much for highlighting that. Gerrit, so I mentioned already in the beginning, we can talk about student mobility. It's been one of the drivers of our industry. A lot of the demand, the extra demand, so to say, has come from new groups of students moving to cities like Vienna. But when we talk about the German market and the Austrian market, at the moment, of course, one of the big topics is the impact of the war in Ukraine. And when we talked before, I asked you, so like, what is actually, happening right now in that market in terms of like how many students are in the German and the Austrian market from these countries, and also what can we see in terms of like potential impact it will have in the next couple of years. So I wanted to start with that conversation. I mentioned already in our buildings ourselves, we have an immediate impact with students that were here already and frankly are suffering from many challenges, not just the emotional impact, but also, for example, a lot of them being cut off financially. So I can imagine that this will be a significant obstacle for not just this generation staying in countries like Austria, but also next year's and the years after. So you were so kind to put some data together. Shall we go to that slide
I'm not sure if
first?
everyone can see the slides, but so you're absolutely right.
It's coming. Yeah, there you go. Can everyone see this? Because otherwise I have to move my comfortable chair a bit.
I'll explain some of the key data points here, I guess. But just like you're saying, yeah, so a war in that sense is on so many levels is disruptive and in only bad ways. And what was surprising to many people within the sector even is that Ukraine is actually a big market for inbound student mobility, and particularly, and that's the largest bar on the top, India. Morocco, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Nigeria are the top 5. In total, Ukraine hosted around 70,000 foreign students when the war broke out. That's roughly the statistic. Hopefully all of them have made it now to safety. But in practical terms, the question is, what does this mean for student mobility? Obviously, it's unlikely that in the short term they'll be able to continue their studies in the Ukraine. A lot of them have been seeking to continue their studies elsewhere in Europe. A lot of universities in Europe, and particularly in Poland, Lithuania, very quickly adopted scholarship schemes and offered accommodation. There has been this Erasmus-sponsored platform where you could basically just look for every university, what they were offering, if they had subsidies, tuition fees, housing, and so on. In practical terms, though, because Ukraine has attracted students that are very price-sensitive and also students that were looking for affordable medical degrees, these will not be on offer for the majority of them across Europe, because those are usually expensive and they're not always taught in English. So that means that a lot of these students will either have to delay their studies until it may be safe to do so again, where universities are not destroyed, because unfortunately we have seen that as well. But a lot of them will be affected in a way that they might have to change their plans completely or go home.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because also when you look at actually the number of the countries that where students were coming from, some of them are also important markets for Germany and Austria. Yeah. But before we go there, the outbound market, that means basically where Ukrainian students were going to. Yeah, I'm pointing at that one, but you can see it probably better.
I think most people can see that one better as well. So this is very regional. Ukrainian students tended to go to Poland, which is one of the most important neighbors, and Russia. What we don't know from this data is if this was mostly Russian speakers from Ukraine that felt that they could study in Russia very easily, or Ukrainian speakers. So obviously with the war, it may be that number will likely drop, but not to zero. Yeah. And Germany is one of the top destinations for Ukrainian students.
Yeah, with Austria here.
And Austria is also in the top 10. And it's likely that Germany will see a higher number of Ukrainian students. A lot of students will, know someone who studies in Germany or has studied there, and they will have these connections. And they will, in the region, most likely seek to continue the studies. But then also the Baltics have been very welcoming with their scholarships in particular, so that will attract a lot of Ukrainian students in particular.
Yeah, and on the next slide we will see the numbers for Russian students. Interesting on the inbound market, most of the inbound students were coming from the region around Russia, and a lot of them smaller countries, not surprisingly, I guess, many of them Russian speaking. China, India, in total, so 30,000 students there. Do you think those will now come to Europe, or will they maybe delay their?
It's an interesting question because it's difficult to make assumptions about what an Indian student thinks about this war. They may not have an opinion on it. They may not care. But also in practical terms, because Russia is affected by these sanctions, it's probably not going to be an attractive student destination for various reasons. Even if you can go, if you can study, the currency has suffered. This probably initially has made this cheaper, but it also means the quality of life, obviously, as is the target of these sanctions, has gone down. So that may mean that students from India, for example, may be looking to other countries. Because predominantly Indian students that are looking for Russia are also looking for affordable education at relatively good universities, and they can, in theory, find that in other countries.
Yeah, and a total of 11,000 Russian students currently in Germany and Austria together. Do you expect them that will change, or what is your prediction there?
Yeah, so the students that are already there, as long as they're enrolled in degree programs, it's likely that they would finish them. In terms of future inbound into Germany and Austria from Russia, there are practical considerations, right? You can't fly at the moment. They may be seeking elsewhere. It's difficult to say what, for example, the Russian government is maybe enforcing there, or what they're trying to convince students if they would like them to study at home instead, or in countries in other regions, for example, because there's also always a consideration of the sending country. And then it's important also to understand that they may need a student visa, and it is conceivable that politically it may not be in Germany's interest to hand out that many student visas to Russian students at the moment.
Yeah. Well, altogether, more than 23,000 students currently in Germany and in Austria from these two countries. So will be very interesting to see how this will develop. But let's go a little bit deeper into the German market. Germany has been one of the most favorite markets for student accommodation investors. We will hear more from James later why that is, and if that continues to be. It's one of the most difficult markets as well. It was one of the markets that started to internationalize quite late on the continent. What's the general picture of the market? How would you describe it?
I'm biased as a German, educated partially in Germany, so my opinion is obviously very good of that education system. No, it's got its drawbacks, but the main reasons, if I can already pick up on a couple of themes that are likely to reappear later, are Germany's public universities are generally tuition free, so it's very affordable. Living costs aren't that high, as opposed to, for example, Norway. That's tuition free, but when students find out that a lunch will set them back 30, 40 euros, maybe not the number one dream destination anymore. Germany also has a very positive student post-study work visa. So after your graduation, you can stay in Germany for 18 months. That's one of the better schemes in Europe. So for someone from outside Europe to come to Germany, have this opportunity, that's a real unique sales proposition. And the German economy generally is strong, so it's not that permeable for people that don't speak German. That's changing a little bit, but it's one of the reasons also to come to Germany, along with great universities. So those are the main drivers that have brought students. And you're right, Germany has been late to internationalize, which is partly because it doesn't charge tuition fees, so there was little economic value for the institutions themselves to do so. But demographically, it's becoming more and more interesting for the country because of sinking birth rates.
And that internationalization started late, but around 2016, I remember that started to pick up. More and more programs started offering international students English programs. But also Germany has traditionally had has been an attractive place also for people that studied German first and then were able to study in German. These are some of the numbers of the changes in the student populations in the last 5 years. What do we see here? what kind of trends do you identify in terms of like the top 10 inbound countries? Where do the students come from?
Right, so looking at the top 10, and we're looking at, for those that can't see all the numbers, but the blue bar represents enrolled foreign students in 2016-17, and the yellow one, the most recent available data from 2020-21. And in the top 10, you find China, for example, has seen some growth over the last 4 or 5 years, and that's probably going to flatten out a bit, partially also because Corona, and also because Chinese students tend to start looking a little more regionally as well if they want to study abroad. Turkey has gone down a little bit. That's possibly going to pick up again because we're seeing an overarching trend of more outbound mobility from Turkey, and Germany is always one of the top choices for them. India has seen explosive growth over the last 4 or 5 years. That has to do probably with the fact that the visa regulations in the UK were a little unclear for them over the last few years, but that's been sorted out, so the UK is picking up in attractiveness, meaning that India is going to taper off probably. And Syria has seen a lot of growth, which has already flattened, and that's obviously a result of refugees coming to Germany from Syria, which, if we look at this graph, and then Ukraine is already in the top 10, is very
Russia
likely
too.
To see that kind of development, maybe not at the same level, but there will be an influx of Ukrainian students into Germany in particular.
Yeah. Now, interesting. So overall growth, not that crazy, but the government, the central government, the federal government, I should say, in Germany had a pro-growth policy as well. I remember that Germany reported quite early on that they had achieved their goals. What do you predict is will be the policy of this new government towards internationalization? Further promotion of it, or do you see?
I love that you're enforcing predictions from me, and nobody's going to look them up in 2 years.
I didn't ask you to bring your ball or your tarot cards, but yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, you're right. So Germany, as a country, had a goal of having, I don't know the exact number, but I think it was around 400,000 international students.
Yeah.
It reached that early because Germany has these factors going for it. But then there has been a shift in tone where growth at all costs is no longer the objective, but rather increasing the quality of the curriculum, whatever that means, because if you ask 100 university people about it, you get 200 opinions probably. But that doesn't mean that growth will not happen. You have different incentives for different players in the sector. The federal government may not necessarily want to enforce that growth happens at this level, but universities may want to pursue that, and there's not really a reason why they wouldn't necessarily. It's just the difference in Germany. If you're a public provider, you do not earn additional tuition fees as in some other countries. So some countries like Sweden, it's very interesting to get more non-European students because it means they can charge higher fees and therefore have more money at their disposal for research activities, for example.
Yeah, that was certainly the case in the Netherlands as well, where they had the same model. If we look at Austria, this is the next slide.
Yeah,
interesting picture.
One country standing out. This says one of two things about Germany. Either there aren't that many university places in Germany, or Germans aren't so eager to learn a new language when they study abroad. So it's grown too.
Thank you, by the way, for choosing the yellow and the blue. I didn't notice it before, but now all of a sudden I see this. You have this.
Oh, let's say that wasn't on purpose. This is our standard brand colors, but yeah.
Our support for Ukraine.
Yeah, other than the growth for Germany in the last 4 or 5 years, Austria, it's been relatively stable. What you do see in Austria is that it's mostly regional students. Yeah. So you got Germany, Italy, Croatia, Hungary, and Bosnia in the top 5. And yeah, Ukraine is also in there, so it's likely that you would see more Ukrainian students in the next few years. What stands out if you compare the top 10 between Austria and Germany is that Syrian students are not in the statistic. There may be reasons for that. It's hard for us to judge that, but it's likely, since Ukraine is already there, it will attract more Ukrainian students, either since they're already here, or if they have a choice in the next few years when they study abroad, they might pick Austria.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Also, as Herbert said, 190,000 students here in this city alone serves clearly also the region to the east of Austria. On policy, anything specific? Like, is Austria also actively promoting? Are universities incentivized to offer more programs in English, or do you see similar systems in place like in Germany?
Yeah, it's also difficult with Austria because they do charge tuition fees, but very low. So effectively, compared to every other European country, it's almost zero. It's around, I think, 1,500 euros a year or something. Yeah. And that ties the hands as well in regards to, do they want more students? What do they want to? Because it's not as if you can say, let's bring in international students and they'll come. You also need to do the marketing. You need to do the footwork. You need to have teams at universities that handle admissions, because enrolling a Nigerian student, for example, that's not just a couple of clicks. You need to guide that person through the visa process. You need to help them find accommodation, for example, and so on. So in Austria, that pressure isn't really at the same level. There's some movement with public and private providers. There are movements by private providers that want to set up universities here for a larger audience, because Austria otherwise then shares a lot of the similarities that also make Germany attractive as a destination, whether or not you study at a public university, but the economic outlook and the ability to stay here and to find a job, that's also interesting in Austria as well.
Yeah, and probably also price conscious consumer. We have a few more minutes left. I wanted to cover two topics with you. One was something that I was not aware of until you mentioned it, which is like the opportunity for non-German universities to open campuses. And then maybe, very brief, also your sort of like trends that you think are interesting for this audience. To
Predictions that I'm known for.
Yeah. Let's go to the case here. Yeah.
Yeah. Who can identify the city? Anyone? I heard Leipzig.
Yeah,
perfect. This is Leipzig.
Free lunch.
Maybe throw in a coffee. Yeah, so I picked Leipzig for this example because 2 or 3 years ago, Lancaster University from the UK opened a satellite campus there. There are considerations why they would do so. One of them, obviously, with Brexit, it helps to have a presence in the EU. It opens up funding opportunities for research, for example. But they picked Leipzig in the end for a couple of reasons, and those reasons are interesting because more UK universities are also looking at satellite campus opportunities. So Leipzig is, for those that can't place it well, it's in East Germany. It has around 500,000 inhabitants. It's got a very strong economy. It's one of the strongest growing cities in Germany after a decade of essentially decline around the 2000s. And it has 3 education providers, a public university, a very strong business school, and an arts and music school. But what it didn't have was a provider that would offer education in English at the undergraduate level, so bachelor's. And Lancaster then decided to go to Leipzig to go into this market opportunity. Now they had a rocky start because mostly of Corona, because it was difficult in 2020 to get students to fill the classes that way. But now the investment that they've done seems to be paying off. So the student numbers are growing. They've now started offering a master's degree as well. And the lesson learned here is basically there's a market segment of students that is interested in a UK degree, but combining that with the opportunities that a country like Germany can offer. There are others in Europe, so the University of Coventry, for example, is operating in, I think, Wrocław in Poland. That's also a very recent development, and other UK universities then are looking into where can we do this. And then there are a couple of cities that have basically similarities with Leipzig that might be potential destinations. So I'm thinking, for example, Hanover. Hanover has very good public universities, but they aren't really established as providers of English language education. Yet it's a very strong local economy, very well connected. Or, for example, Nuremberg or Augsburg are also cities that could fall into the same kind of characteristics that Leipzig has. So this is an opportunity, definitely.
Interesting. And last but not least, what are some of the trends that you think we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, so we've looked at user behavior on study.eu, and like I mentioned, this basically paints a picture of what it could look like in a year or 2 years. What we are seeing is an overarching trend of increased interest from Turkey. But that's across the board for really all countries. In Germany, this may reignite this already long-standing love between Turkish students and German universities. What we are also seeing is interest from Africa. But Africa, and this is difficult now obviously with the war, is highly dependent on its economic ties also to Ukraine and Russia. So this can have an effect that maybe that interest will go down again. The difficulty with students from Africa, if they want to come to Germany or Austria, always the visa process. It's very difficult for them to even get appointments to be approved, even if they have a letter of acceptance from a university. India is recovering, but that interest is mostly going to the UK now because of the postgraduate visa route. What we're also expecting post-Brexit is more intra-European mobility, so European students doing more exchanges or degree programs within Europe, just in other countries within the EU.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I am sure a lot of people have more questions, maybe also want to check in with you more on specific questions they have regarding this market. But that would be great to do during the coffee break. Thank you so much for joining. And
thank you as well.
Should I take this one? Wow, thank you so.
Just a second.
I've got a pretty loud voice anyway, so you probably could all be able to hear me. I'd just really like to start with, by saying I'm really proud of having a real conversation on the stage. I've attended many events recently, and lots of them haven't even mentioned the war. And it's really interesting to see actually how the data and the conversations that we can have as a community will actually directly be impacted on our day-to-day kind of processes and operations. So I'd just like to start there. I'd also like to highlight some of the amazing community projects that are going on at the moment. I've seen Where's Uni? Housing Anywhere have been working to not only get free accommodation, but also cheap accommodation across the whole of Europe to help house people that are fleeing, which I think is absolutely incredible. And you guys, yeah. I'd also like to mention some of the operators as well that are actually housing some of those people, such as IC Campus and Milestone, that are directly helping support those people on the ground. I had a really scary stat, which was something about 80% of the male Ukrainian students who had actually just left their accommodation to go back and help fight. So that's a really real situation that's happening, and I'm really happy as a community that we're helping support these people. So what I'm going to do now is take us to a break, a nice refreshment break. For those at home, we're going to be playing some... Just spat everywhere, that's lovely, isn't it? Sorry. That's why I shouldn't be on stage. And we've got some pre-recorded videos from some amazing different people, such as stuff that's been pre-recorded. So please take a look at that around student mobility and internationalisation. And finally, at the back over there, you might see some boards. We're going to ask you guys what your thoughts and feelings are on ESG, and this is going to help us shape our conversations tomorrow as part of our partner meetup. So please make sure you grab a post-it and you put your thoughts and feelings on there. So thank you very much again, and we will come back after the break.
Hello, and welcome to our presentation. At UNESCO's International Institute for Higher Education, we're working on a major project about virtual student mobility, and we're pleased to share some of our findings with you. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, virtual forms of student mobility were almost completely eclipsed by physical mobility, which has been seen as a core activity, and even called a gold standard in the internationalization of higher education. The dramatic growth in the number of globally mobile students is one reason that attention has focused on physical border crossing until now. Between 2000 and 2017, there was a 165% increase in the number of physically mobile students. However, this only represents a very small proportion of the world's student population, just 2%. Not only has access to physical mobility been very exclusive, it has also been concentrated in particular regions, with most students going from countries in the Global South to those in the Global North, and far fewer travelling from the Global North to the Global South. But then, during 2020, borders and campuses around the world closed. The COVID-19 pandemic changed everything for higher education student mobility.
With the onset of COVID-19, the world has woken up to the potential of virtual student mobility, or VSM. Its development has been fairly small scale, but there is no baseline to measure VSM before COVID-19. VSM uses information and communications technology to support cross-border collaboration and to enhance intercultural and knowledge exchange. Can take place in a fully virtual environment or as a complement to physical mobility. We have identified 4 types of VSM: academic, experiential, cultural, and emergency. Emergency VSM describes the current situation for students who are temporarily in a different country and who are now having to continue their education in virtual mode. As a result of COVID-19, there has been an outbreak in interest and activity related to VSM. For example, the Virtual Student Exchange Program by the Association of Pacific Rim Universities that benefits over 400 students in 10 countries. Santander University's Stay at Home, a scholarship and grant program that benefits over 10,000 students worldwide to study online and improve digital skills. A shared statement, mission, and action plan signed by 33 universities around the globe to support mobility, and the increase of VSM in 60% of universities, colleges, and institutes worldwide.
A primary benefit of VSM is its low cost compared with physical mobility. It can cater for students from disadvantaged social groups not be able to afford the costs associated with physical mobility. The severe limitations on international travel as a result of COVID-19 have been seen as a silver lining in that they have focused attention on the carbon footprint generated by international higher education. VSM offers the opportunity for higher education institutions around the world to seriously engage in their sustainability commitments. Yet, there are challenges associated with virtual mobility. For example, students, parents, and employers may perceive it as an inferior experience compared to physical forms of mobility. This creates the need to communicate that while VSM is in essence different from physical mobility, it can be used perfectly as a complement to or alternative for physical mobility. The global digital divide describes disparities primarily between developed and developing countries in access to technology and the internet and the opportunities derived from such access. For example, whereas there is a 90% internet penetration rate in North America, the figure is only 47% in Africa. Substantial digital divides also exist within countries among other demographic characteristics. Therefore, VSM, if not supported by ICT provision for disadvantaged students, may further widen inequalities in access to an international experience in collaborative learning. However, at the heart of these challenges, some promising initiatives have responded to bridge the digital divide and increase access to disadvantaged students. For example, the Kenyan government has partnered with Google's sister firm Loon to launch 35 internet balloons that will provide internet to remote parts of the country. The governments of Australia and Canada are providing dedicated funding to improve access to mobility for underrepresented groups.
Here comes the topic of quality assurance in virtual student mobility. With diverse players involved in virtual student mobility, having a quality assurance mechanism in place for monitoring and evaluation purposes is important at all stages, including attainment, assessment, and recognition. Existing challenges for this topic include infrastructural limitations, language barriers, quality of degrees and courses, and differences in implementation among institutions. There are 4 areas that a quality assurance mechanism can address. First, identification of clear goals and specific learning outcomes. Second, transparency in the validation process of courses and degrees. Third, assessment through development of methodologies for measuring learning outcomes. And fourth, assurance on monitoring and evaluation, as well as clear reference to qualification standards. So what exists now? At the international level, UNESCO has a global convention on the recognition of qualifications concerning higher education. At a regional level, the European Union supported the publication of a quality assurance handbook for virtual mobility. At a national level, the Quality Assurance Agency of the UK has issued non-regulatory guidance for higher education institutions. Collaboratively, at various levels, we're pushing to assure and improve quality in virtual student mobility.
At the time of recording this presentation in January 2021, the pandemic is still having a major influence all around the world. We've seen that virtual student mobility has very quickly become a significant factor in the ongoing internationalisation of higher education. Now, thinking ahead to a time when travel and health restrictions are lifted leads us to ask, what is the future for virtual student mobility? We also want to know what you think. Please get in touch and tell us your views. You can visit the UNESCO ISALC website for more information about this and our other international higher education projects, as well as to download the image used in this presentation. Thank you for watching. We look forward to hearing from you.
It is all about reinvesting meaning in the systems and the things and the world around us.
For me, the class foundation, if I only ever go to one event, is the event.
This conference is the most important for student housing because it is not only one sector, but it's like many sectors at the same time.
I have the opportunity to talk with people who are in my business segment, who may even be my competitors, but we all have some really big challenges that are common, and I think sustainability is the thing that keeps me up at night. It keeps them up too.
Currently in Europe, we face a major housing crisis, and it is a crisis that no stakeholder can solve by themselves.
So the class conference is bringing the global community together in one place to talk about the issues that matter to us the most.
Just seeing what's happening and how challenging this time frame is, but also how many opportunities are out there.
And I think actually about future building is about being honest and being critical and being able to have that conversation.
This is the zeitgeist of thinking in accommodation, in cities, in universities across the world. We have so much to gain from this environment. You just can't not be here.
It is my pleasure to be here with you today, even if online, because you are the closest guides of students going on mobility. And that is why we need you. We need you to promote the potential of the Erasmus Plus application to students. This is a tool developed by students and by universities for the benefit of other students. And that is why we need you to promote it, as it has the potential to really benefit all the students before, during and after their mobility abroad. So this is very important for us, that you promote, well, first that you take full opportunity of the potential of this application, that you promote it to the students, but also that you help us to make it as relevant as possible to your needs. And that is the objective of the meeting of today, and that is why I would like to thank really warmly Elto University for organizing this hybrid event. Elto University, that is, as you mentioned, it's a key partner of the charming European University. And I would like to thank as well ESN and EUF for their continuous hard work and engagement in providing relevant services and support to Erasmus Plus students. In January, the European Commission has published its European strategy for universities that provides a long-term vision for the field of higher education for the years to come. It provides support to enable higher education institutions to adapt in this quickly evolving society. And we have proposed more than 50 actions to support higher education institutions across Europe. And among them, there are 4 flagships. And the European Student Card Initiative is one of these very important flagships that is essential to bring European students closer together and to develop this strong sense of European belonging. And of course, the Erasmus Plus app is a core part, an important part of this European Student Card Initiative, as it provides students with a single entry point to manage all their different steps in this mobility abroad. And it provides as well links to higher education institutions across Europe to connect and to exchange essential academic data. So this Erasmus Plus app was created a few years ago when we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the Erasmus program at that time. And it has evolved a lot since then, especially last year, where we revamped totally the Erasmus Plus app to make it even more relevant to the needs of you and of your students. Now we would like to use this opportunity today to hear your feedback and also give you an opportunity to exchange your good practices and also to exchange with us potential for further development and further improvements. And for this, so there have been continuous functionalities that have been developed and added, but to really fully exploit the potential of all these new functionalities, like signing the online learning agreement, for example, we need all your universities to be connected to the Erasmus Without Paper network. And we know that this requires a collective effort at the level of at European level, national level, and at your level within the university. Of course, it does not depend only on the international relation offices, but it's also dependent on the support that you will get from your IT colleagues, of course. But this is a and simpler. So now with the developments, the Erasmus Plus app also gives the opportunity to the students and alumni to exchange tips and to really create a vibrant Erasmus community, connecting and helping each other, not only the Erasmus Plus students, but also the alumni and the current ongoing Erasmus Plus students. And the app also fully deploys the Erasmus student card to give possibility to students to get easier access to services when they arrive on the campus abroad, but also to cultural activities that are organized locally. So this is only the start, as the potential is huge once all universities and their students are connected. So it's a journey that we have started years ago and that we continue together with all of you. So that is why today is very important for you to exchange, as I said, and I'm looking forward to hearing to your feedback at the end of the day, and I wish you all a very fruitful session today. Thank you very much.
The coronavirus has upended the world of higher education. In March, students were abruptly sent home. Classes were moved online. Now, as campuses across the country sit empty, administrators are scrambling to prepare for what comes next.
In many ways, the attack that COVID represents to higher education is a really straightforward assault on the bottom line.
The financial challenges are severe. I mean, I won't kid you, they're profoundly challenging.
There will be more bankruptcies, more business failures, more need for federal and state bailouts.
The pandemic has thrown the budgets of public and private colleges into turmoil. Since the lockdowns went into effect, they have seen their revenues drop and their expenses climb.
I think, more than belt tightening, this may be something like reconstructive surgery, if not actually, thoracic surgery.
With all education now virtual, e-learning is having a moment. When students were sent home mid-semester, American higher ed began what was essentially a nationwide experiment. In the space of 3 weeks, all learning was moved from the classroom to the internet. This has accelerated the trend towards online education and raised more fundamental questions about the value of a college degree.
College students suing Drexel University, the University of Miami, and others saying online learning is no replacement for a bricks and mortar on-campus experience.
What will be the lasting legacy of COVID-19 for higher education? Could this virus lead to a wave of college and university closures? Will the classroom we once knew gradually return, or could COVID permanently transform how we learn?
Whoa. Hey, Brian.
To help answer these questions, I spoke to Brian Alexander, a higher education futurist. As his title suggests, Alexander spends a lot of time contemplating what might happen in the higher education space. In a passage included in his 2020 book, Alexander suggested the possibility of a global pandemic transforming the industry.
I wrote the chapter in 2018, 2019, and I'm afraid it is chillingly prescient.
But how do you imagine a post-COVID future when so little is known about COVID itself? With so much uncertainty surrounding the pandemic, Alexander believes it's impossible to divine any one outcome. Instead, he sees 3 potential paths for the future of higher education.
One is that we could be in the middle of a short plague. And that is, it's something which burns out relatively quickly. That perhaps a month from now, we are very, very far down the downhill side. And that come August and September, we'll be in good shape, and colleges and universities can open their physical doors to welcome face-to-face students again. The second possibility is that the pandemic will extend through December into 2021. In that case, then we have to think about higher education being virtual throughout the entire fall semester.
Recently, the California State University system announced that it would be canceling most in-person classes in the fall and will instead hold them online. This is significant because the Cal State system is the largest 4-year university system in the country. The system is also one of the most diverse in the country, with 1/3 of undergraduates the first in their families to attend college. One of those is Anna Ruth Bertolazzi, a senior at San Francisco State University.
As a single parent, my son, he's a 7th grader, soon now close to be an 8th grader. It was a challenge.
Like many students, one challenge Anna has faced are class disruptions due to a slow internet connection.
There are moments when if I ask a question to my Zoom class professor, my voice is not even projecting or it stops.
Students like Anna would also be impacted by Alexander's third forecast.
A third possibility is that instead of having a simple pandemic, short or long, that we'll have something more complicated with multiple waves. For academia, I dubbed this the toggle term. This is when a campus will have to switch back and forth between face-to-face instruction and wholly online instruction.
Each of these scenarios would be costly. Even in the best forecast, where the pandemic is shorter and campuses reopen in the fall, there's no guarantee that all students and faculty will return. That means smaller classes and less revenue for schools. If the fall semester is online, Alexander expects the financial hit to be even more severe, as more students demand tuition breaks.
We have about 4,400 colleges and universities in the U.S. all told, and I could see easily 10% staring into the abyss this time next year. What worries me are, first of all, private colleges and universities that, therefore lack any state support, but that are not the most highly ranked, the lower ranked and medium ranked ones.
Dominican University is a small private liberal arts college located in San Rafael, California.
Yeah, we know we're going to have some financial hits, so we know we'll have to make some adjustments to get there, but we know where we're headed, and we're really reasonably well positioned to manage this. The place where Dominican is not as well positioned, and it's true of many, many small colleges, is we don't have deep pockets. We have a really small endowment.
But small private schools aren't the only ones at risk. Some state universities are in trouble as well.
I'm also concerned about public university systems that are facing similar problems. For example, you think about Pennsylvania.
One of the public systems at risk is Pennsylvania's state system of higher education, which is made up of 14 state-owned colleges and universities.
The challenges of higher education, public higher education generally, they're pretty acutely concentrated here. Obviously, a historic pattern of declining public investment has forced universities to increase tuition and actually net average price overall. So those challenges sort of have combined in our system to produce a 20% enrollment decrease since 2010, between 2010 and 2019. And obviously, as our enrollments go down, we're an enrollment-driven industry, and as a consequence, our revenues have declined as well.
If there is one consensus in higher ed, it's that online education is here to stay, and that it will only grow in importance. One company that is uniquely positioned to understand this trend is Chegg. Chegg provides online services for about 60% of American college students.
When I went to college many, many years ago, my intro to business courses were 300-person lectures in a giant auditorium. Not only are those potentially dangerous right now, but the reality is those lend themselves very, very well to online learning.
Last semester, schools were forced online out of necessity. But the reality is, for many students, necessity may keep them there.
We have to imagine that many, many families are seeing their savings and investments put into chaos, those who have those. Some of them are being hit economically by unemployment or underemployment. Some of them additionally are being hit by disease.
Like a lot of things right now, what you're seeing is an acceleration. There's already been a movement of lots of people questioning the ROI of going in for a 4-year degree that all in may cost $250,000 or $300,000 for people while they're also not working and getting a job that entire time.
More students online means less revenue for schools, but Brian Alexander is optimistic that the industry will get creative and adapt to students' needs.
Well, for looking at the fall, and if either of my scenarios come to pass, either the toggle term or the long plague, and faculty and staff have to prepare for a full semester online, now we have months, not weeks. We have months to plan, prepare, shape, and hone the experience.
Starting with the next session. a data insight analysis from Savills, who will be looking at the DAC market, what's happening, where the opportunities lie, where the responsibility is, and also where acquisitions are happening. So, James, can you please come up on stage? Thank you.
So, hi everyone. Yeah, James Snaith from Savills. I can use that one, okay. So yeah, I'm a director in the operational capital markets team, typically doing transactional work, but we've put together a kind of a data analysis of the DAC region for you today. So it was really interesting hearing about the mobility session before. But just to start, at the start of this presentation, I think it would be useful to kind of run through some of the fundamentals of the market ahead of going on to the investment side. And as I'm sure you know, the university system in the DAC region is excellent. Predominantly public funded, and a lot of the kind of the measures that we have for the strength of the university system revolve around rankings with Times and QS, and on measures such as that, the universities rank very, very highly. It is worth saying that the university system is starting to kind of integrate the research facilities with the educational side, which will increase the universities in the international rankings, and as we're seeing, that's starting to happen with the German universities already. So moving on to student numbers, student populations, that's the kind of the pinkish bars sitting behind the lines, and as you can see, since 2011-12 academic year, they've grown consistently and very steadily all the way through to the COVID-affected 2020-2021 academic year. Principally, this is the German student population, by the way, but principally the growth was kind of coming from international students, as you can see on the kind of white line on this graph. And what was super interesting is that when you get to kind of 2020-2021 academic year, that although the international students fell away a little bit due to mobility issues, the domestic students kind of picked up the slack a bit, so that actually the overall student population was, kept on that trajectory of growth. And that is something that we see amongst, whenever there are kind of big shocks to globally and with the global kind of economic system, that people do tend to return to education, and I think that's playing into the domestic student population on this graph. So translating that to, again, the COVID-affected 2020-2021 year, and we've got Germany up at the top here, all German, top 30 German cities, and we can see growth in 21 of those cities through what was a very difficult period for students and for student mobility. What is interesting is that in Germany we go beyond the Big Seven, and a lot of kind of commercial markets focus on the Big Seven, but you can see the likes of Aachen, Kiel, Regensburg performing really well when it comes to student populations growth. And as we can see, the Austrian cities and Zurich down at the bottom have also performed extremely well through extremely difficult times for students over this period. So moving on from the population side to how have the markets fared, and these line charts show rental growth across different types of cities in Germany. Again, through the COVID period, and you can see how resilient the rental profile is for the different kinds of cities, so A cities, B cities, C cities, and D cities. What's interesting is that C and B cities have performed, almost better than those A cities. This is, by the way, a combination of all student and micro rents, including not-for-profit type of operators. And I think it's, given the state of the markets and how mature the residential market is in the DACH region, it's almost remiss to to not mention how strong the residential market is, because a lot of students' first port of call is to say, well, can I find some accommodation within that very, very mature and strong residential market? So here, what we've done is we've said, if you're a new entrant into, if you're trying to find some accommodation for your studies in Frankfurt, what are your choices? Firstly, it's important to state that the rents have been growing, so you're going to be expecting to pay something like 4% year on year in terms of rental increases, which is shown on the graph on the left, and that's either for furnished or unfurnished accommodation. And then secondly, how can I get hold of the accommodation? So we've analysed how many one-person households there are in Frankfurt, with there being 220,000. If you just look at a simple how many vacant rooms are there to the total supply, then that's 32,000, which is only 0.2% of the one-bedroom apartments. So there's not a lot of stock you can get hold of in the first instance. And then, by the way, you've got to compete with about 60,000 new city residents and students to find the circa 40,000 one-bedroom flats that you can get access to. So there is a bit of a supply shortage, and that's being felt not just in the student market that we obviously love talking about, but also in the wider residential market, which is at play here for a resident. So moving from the fundamentals of the market to a bit of an investment update, and I don't think it'll be too much of a surprise to tell you that yields have sharpened and continue to sharpen since 2015, so that as at the end of last year, we were at for Germany about 3.3% as a prime yield. In addition to that, the gap between yields on offices and multifamily is shortening as well. But this is all in the context of us picking through a relatively limited number of volume of transactions within the student space. So the graph on the right shows you the deal volume in millions for each of those years. And really, if you to put the kind of transaction volumes that we're showing here into context, the UK generally trades kind of 3 to 4 billion every year. There's something on the market in Spain at the moment, which is 900 million. So that's more than kind of what's been traded in every year, apart from one in Germany. So we're working with a relatively limited amount of transactional evidence in student. And then if you put that even more into context and consider student transaction volumes versus multifamily, that same chart is on here, and these very small little yellow lines that you can see at the bottom of the chart are essentially those transaction volumes when compared against multifamily in Germany, which traditionally trades between kind of 20 and 30 billion annually, and 2021 was a bit of a bumper year due to the Vonovia and Deutsche Wohnen acquisition. So in context, that's only 1.35% of the multifamily market. So who is buying, and what are the deal types that they are generally doing? Again, this is for the German market. So typically the market is characterized by the integrated managers who also portfolio manage and generally can source the capital themselves. And we've got a relatively smaller portion of those kind of multi-type fund managers. If we were looking at a different market, we would see more of those fund managers who have level of allocation towards student accommodation within their portfolio. But due to the kind of the volumes of transactions that we're talking about, and the fact that it has to generally be a ground-up development or a forward deal, then we're typically not seeing the massive amount of kind of fund manager involvement in the market. And the types of deals are represented by the pie chart on the right-hand side, which generally shows that own development and forward deals are the predominant type of deals within the market. Even if you're talking about investment into existing property, that might not be stabilized. It might be the kind of acquisition on practical completion, and that still requires the mobilization by a manager. So what are the investment dynamics, some of these investment dynamics which are at play? So I have talked about the strength of the residential sector. Is it easier for a generalist fund manager to look into the residential sector before they look into the student sector, where they have to get their head around numerous kind of nuances? Is there a lack of aggregation plays within the markets that we're talking about? Yeah, that is the case. I mean, in the UK market, by comparison, we've seen a lot of trades since 2016, 2017 of portfolios in excess of kind of 2,000 beds, and there just simply aren't that many of them within the DACH region. So does core capital either need to or understand student accommodation? Arguably, they just look at the residential space and consider that a kind of easier product to get their heads around from that scale perspective, but also from a unit type and a unit use perspective. And just a bit of a consideration ahead of the panel discussion a bit later. But what next for investment into the DACH region? I mean, like all of the European capital markets, the region will have to grapple with the rising inflation, how that impacts kind of on rising base rates, and really what we but all of this is kind of generally underpinned by a market which is very strong fundamentally. So hence going back to the start of the presentation and saying, well, actually the student numbers are there, the breadth of opportunities to invest in the B and C cities is there, but all of these kind of additional investment considerations are essentially considerations that any investor faces, but they do need to be taken into account in student accommodation within the DACH region as well. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Sorry.
I didn't think. Sorry. Okay. So I was putting Lippy on. Okay. So thank you so much. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, James, for that data insight. Really interesting again to see the actual data itself and what's happening on the ground. What I'm going to ask now is our events production teamo person to bring on these seats, ready for. Oh, we've got a video. Yeah. So please enjoy our video.
So I'm a hotelier for life. So my whole life I've spent in the hospitality sector, starting as a waiter with the age of 14, and then worked in different countries in different functions for different brands. And 5 years ago, I came to Steiner, and Steiner is one of the leading real estate developers in Switzerland, and Steiner has identified a big problem in Switzerland for student housing, and had the objective to develop or to do something against this situation. So I visited a lot of PBSAs inside Switzerland, outside Switzerland also. Then I started to attend the class conferences. In Switzerland, more than 70% of the land surface is lakes and mountains. So you cannot build a house on it, right? So in Switzerland, in a PBSA, a lot of times you have cluster apartments. In Switzerland, you don't have a lot of high-rise, right? So when in UK, for example, many times they are like 10, even 15 or even higher buildings. That's hard to do in Switzerland. It's a long process to have a permit, a building permit for a tall building, right? That's our job as a real estate developer to help the investors to achieve these types of things. In Switzerland, there are some very few till now PBSAs with a real communal space, right, where you have some shared services and which have a nice look and feel. When somebody is arriving, really not ask the first question, how are you going to pay, right? But it's welcome the person, but welcome the whole person, right? To say, did you eat? Are you thirsty? How was your journey? Right? It's really about hospitals. Right? So it's really this component of welcoming, but also caring, right? So and we have seen it now through the pandemic, where those operators who already before the pandemic they had a good notion about physical and mental health of the people, they were very successful now throughout the pandemic, and others were less successful. So we have very, very experienced and good operators in Switzerland. I think the investor side is still not very educated on that PBSA is a real professional asset class, right? Because there are not enough examples in Switzerland yet. What is changing also in the mindset of the population is that now more and more people say, no, when I go to study, I don't want to leave. Right? So this is a generational mindset which is shifting now. So that I think it's also an opportunity because the demand for PBSA will be stronger in the future. In Switzerland, a lot of Swiss students can study in another city without being obliged to change the city, because the transport and the mobility system is it's hard to find a country where it's better, right? So that's definitely also one of the reasons why I had investor talks where they said, why should I invest in student housing if the students can, after the class at the university, they can travel home by train, right? I mean, we are talking about lifelong learning now, right? And after I think there will be some challenges after the pandemic, but also after the war, hopefully, where the workplace will change and more people maybe will have to go back to university to make sure that they have a job till they retire, right? So when we think PBSA, we also have to think not only for young students, we have to think also how can we inside the PBSA help to professional growth to all kinds of students. The number of students is increasing much faster than the number of student beds, right? And that is true in Zurich, in Lausanne, in any city. The number of students is growing. And as I said, also the number of Swiss students who don't want to live in a shared flat. And also these shared flats are less and less available for students because of Airbnb and other people move in there and the student cannot move in there. There could be a much better communication with more stakeholders and really, because in the end of the day, the cities want to attract talent and to keep them. The operators are good, the numbers are growing, the quality is going up. Like I said, the most important thing is to put the people in the heart and in the center of everything. And then it's important for us as a real estate developer, it's important as an operator, it's important for the investor, it's important for the city, for the university. We just need to start from the person who is there. And then we will get it right. And this we have to do it together.
Okay, thank you so much. Please join me in thanking Walter for helping us learn about the Swiss market a little bit more. So up next, we have a panel on the state of student living within the DACH markets. I'm going to invite up our wonderful panelists in the right order as well. So Harold, please take your seat on number 1. Gunther, please take your seat on number 2. Elizabeth, our wonderful moderator, please take your seat in the middle. Paddy, please take your seat on number 4, and Rainer on number 5. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're really happy to be here today. What we're going to do is I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and I'll introduce myself in the order. And then we have just a few questions to kick us off. And if there are any questions from the audience and we have time, whether online or in person, we're happy to take those as well. So I'll start from my right. So Harold, if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and a little about who you are and what brings you here today.
I'm Harold. Nice to meet you. Welcome to Vienna. Yes, Value One and Milestone, Gary and Christopher are here as well. You heard a little bit about our energy side. Milestone is operational in 6 countries, from Germany to Portugal, to name a few, and trying to grow further and faster.
My name is Günther Jedlička. I'm the CEO of ÖAD Student Housing. The biggest part of you, I think, saw already the Molkereistraße, so you know me. And the reason why I'm here, maybe to influence you to build in an eco-friendly way in the future.
I'm Elizabeth Cox. I work for Basecamp Student. We're a developer and operator in Germany, Denmark, and Poland.
Hi everyone, I'm Paddy Allen. I'm head of operational capital markets for Colliers. Been coming to a number of these, I think, since they were incepted, and it's amazing just to see how it's expanded over the years. We focus on student accommodation, build to rent, co-living, senior housing, hotels, anything with a bed, essentially.
Hello, I'm Rainer from International Campus. We are we are operator, investor and developer for student housing and young professional living in Germany, Netherlands, Austria. We also have a scheme in Prague. Thanks. We currently have some 6,000 beds in operations, and further growing, and those countries are more or less our home turf.
Thank you, everyone. So we're actually going to start with Gunther, because I know that you may have to leave just a couple of minutes early. And you are a local here, and we have the opportunity today to visit one of your beautiful sites, so thank you. But maybe if we could start with you, and you could tell us a little about, on the ground, what's going on here in Vienna in student living, and what are you seeing trends both in the private world and in the social housing world?
Well, the last 2 years were really, really difficult, but not only for us, but I think for all of you. We had really problems because we accommodate, in fact, only international students. So it was really, really difficult the last 2 years. What I see in the Austrian market is it's completely different than the German market, or I think mainly all the other markets in the world, because we do not have any housing problem regarding student accommodation, I have to say. So in Vienna, I'm now in the business for 27 years. We always accommodated all international students coming to our organization. We always succeeded to accommodate all. So there is no real problem. I think the standard, the quality of the student houses in Austria and in Vienna are really high. And we do our business, or our business is to build eco-friendly. So that's the reason why I'm here, maybe to influence you or to say that it makes sense, not only from the environmental point of view, but also from the economical point of view. In the long run, John Maynard Keynes said we are all dead. He was right. But if you think on the future, and it was said we won't reach the 1.5 goal. I think it will be very, very difficult, but at least we have to try. So that's my message.
Great, thank you. Rainer, would you be so kind as to tell us a little bit about what you've been seeing over the last 2 years based on your experience in the DACH market?
Yeah, let me focus a little bit on Germany as it is our biggest market, but I think in principle the same applies to the Netherlands and Austria here. All of us have been caught by surprise with the COVID spread, and all of us have taken hits on occupancy, and I think you could also see that in James' chart on evolution on rent, and everybody got nervous in 21, beginning of 21, on how to recover. Do we need to discount or not? And I think this dip is the result of a lot of those who decided to discount and have seen recovery then kicking in pretty quickly in autumn of 21, as there was a large chunk of young people who stayed at home in 2020, and those were accompanying those who left school in 21, so there was a real boost. So for example, our schemes ran full within weeks across all territories. And what we have seen also is transactions picking up. And you're right, James, the number are presumably lower, but relatively in Germany, year on year, trading 10% of the stock, which is pretty much the same as in the UK. And so there is some similarity. And what we face as a challenge going forward is the fact that nobody knows where inflation will lead us. With the all-in rate concept as regards utility costs. Nobody knows how interests will really evolve over the next months, potentially also and hopefully post a war in the Ukraine, where I assume there will be massive liquidity needed to rebuild what our Russian friends are currently destroying over there. And last but not least, in Germany, we also have a huge dip currently to the absence of these KfW programs, who are highly embraced by developers, subsidizing their developments from an energy efficiency point of view. We've seen a lot of deals falling apart earlier this year once these programs were stopped, and nobody knows when a replacement will kick in and what this will look like.
Yeah, and I can second what you have been seeing in Germany as well. I think with our stabilized properties and our already open properties, we saw, particularly when the borders shut down, we saw an initial dip. But we also saw students stay. And I think that was a really important piece as we think about what our role is within the not only just the university sector, but the social infrastructure. We remained a home for students, and I think that that's an important piece that we can't forget within the sector. Patty, I'm going to move to you now as the capital markets guy. What are you seeing on the product side, particularly in this region?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think when we look back and see the evolution of the region and over a short space of time, and I think James's slides really kind of showed that. You know, probably pre-2016, there weren't really that many kind of, I say, scaled up businesses. You know, within the DACH region, Germany and Austria mainly, it was mainly sort of family-run businesses, and what we saw was a lot of trading out of those family properties where they probably weren't going to be sold down to the next generation, and more professionalised operators came in. I think what we've seen certainly in the last couple of years is that not one size fits all. I think probably if you were in student housing in the early days, it was very cookie cutter. This was the way to do it. It was very utility driven. A bed, a bathroom, a reception, that's it. Make sure it's warm and dry if you can. And this is the price point. I think what we're now seeing is a lot more verticals within that space. And that's coming from a real understanding of the different customer segments within student. Students, they're not all after the same thing. There are students who want a more premium product and have the ability to pay for that, and we've seen that through the kind of burgeoning middle classes across the developed world and the developing world. But there are also those students who are still on a budget, and actually are much more focused on the utility side and saying, well, actually, do you know what? I just want a bed in a good location and I'm willing to pay that for that. And so neither is a wrong answer. When we look at, when we're evaluating businesses which are focused on either end of the spectrum, it's not wrong to say that one is not going to work or will work. So it's about understanding the customer segments and the customer demands within those segments. And for me, across all the cities that that James showed on his slides there, and the cities that a number of us are operating in here, there are those customer segments. The question we need to be asking is in each of those is how deep are they? And how much can they take? And for a lot of people, I think going into some of these segments, they're probably early movers, and it's whether is your risk-adjusted return appropriate for the early mover, for getting that kind of early mover advantage, and that's kind of what we're starting to see in terms of the product itself. I mean, we would have seen this morning, the way that they've changed is really fascinating. And student accommodation has become a lot more outward-looking rather than inward. I think in the early days, probably 10 years ago, and even when we started doing stuff in Germany 5 or 6 years ago, it was very much, I'm landlord, you're tenant, here's the set of rules. It was not very customer-focused. You obey the rules, you pay me money, I can tell you what I want to do when I want. It's a much more customer service-oriented business now. And before we were trying to keep people out, now we're trying to get people in. And not just the residents. We would have seen that with the student hotel earlier. It's trying to curate that transient community, throughout the different parts of the building, and that's the real evolution we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think it's given us an opportunity to listen to what the students need, and not just the students that are living with us now, but if we look at the 15, 16-year-olds, the ones who are going to be living with us in 2, 3, 4 years, we really need to look for what they're looking for. Right, and are we building and operating to their needs as well? Because they are our future also as a business. But Harold, I'd love for you to speak a little bit to the Vienna market and kind of what Patty was saying and what you see.
I think the interesting thing is, and we've seen that today, was a great combination of site tours. I mean, I'm still it's difficult to admit, I've never been in your house before. Thank you for having me today. And it was fascinating for me to see something that has been built for 17 years ago and very advanced in terms of energy consumption as well. And for me, that has always been a key thing with the next generation. What will they be focusing on? And I think energy is one of the key things. But the other thing and it was great to go directly from your building with Frank to the student hotel, because it is different. You've got some nice rooms there, and you got this amazing boardroom, which are still on 3 floors with 2 bedrooms, which you will explain to me at some stage, Frank. But okay, that's a boardroom. And I think, but what resonated with me, when we were standing in the party cellar, and in the party cellar there is not much. There is no window. There are a few chairs. There are a couple of tables. There's a kitchen. It's a nice party cellar. And what your colleague said, it is the most popular room. It is the most popular room, and that's what I think is also the key thing. What is the future generation needed for? It is creative solutions. And sometimes, and Ryan and I have been starting to brainstorm that a little bit. I think sometimes a little bit less is more, because that's a simple room, but it then invites creativity. There's a lot of things you can do, just in terms of social interaction, which I think is a key thing as well. And that is not specific to Vienna, but I just reflecting on the tour today, I think it was great to have this white transparency, and then you stand in the student hotel with the bed talks, where you have really a very wide offer, but there's no empty space, and you have an almost empty space, and that I found just very interesting from what we really need for the future of Europe, which I think is creative solution finding. Yes.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what we've seen is just a hunger for students to interact with each other once again, and that party space is really a blank canvas for students, and that's what I think that they really want, right? They want to create their own future, they want to create the world, and so what type of canvas are we providing for them, and what does that mean? So on that, what type of canvas do we need to provide, not just from a facilities perspective, but from an experience perspective moving forward? What do you think is the next big thing?
Just thinking about what you were saying then, again, if we go back 10 years, if we were looking at a new development on a bit of paper, as real estate people, we like to put everything into a silo. You know, and we'd be very prescriptive about what the spaces were going to be used for. That's a gym, and this is where the equipment's going to go. That's a study room. This is where the chairs and the desks are going to go, and there's going to be this many of them. I think what we see now are these spaces actually where we're just delivering a canvas, a blank canvas, that movable furniture, movable lighting. You know, you can bring the ceiling in, you can increase that, you can increase the lighting, you can dim the lighting, and sort of, you know, creating these spaces that actually the students can do what they want in them, and they can change. And from a real estate perspective, that's brilliant for our bottom line, because actually we're not spending loads of money fitting something out for then it not to get used, and in 2 or 3 years' time we have to go and put some capital expenditure in and change it. Providing a blank canvas is exactly what I think we should be doing, because the students will make it their own however they want to. So things like dance studios, which are, you put a mirrored wall in that can be used as a dance studio, a yoga studio, but can then be used for birthday parties and, you know, and discos or whatever it is. I think that's really, you know, that's really important. I take one of the things that some business like WeWork is a really good example, have done really well, is employing people who are mood managers, you know, to sense the mood. And again, you look at staff in student accommodation 15 years ago, they were typically ex-army. It was to keep order. And then, you know, when I was working with Chris and the team at GSA, we were employing people from Four Seasons, you know, because it was about customer service delivery, you know, and understanding what we're doing there. And so now we're delivering those spaces to do that as well.
Yeah, and I think it's the professionalization of the sector, I think, is really interesting. So I come from the US, where the student accommodation market is a little bit more mature, and the professionalization of the folks who operate not only on the university and the campus side, but in the professional side, right? They receive master's degrees in which they work and run student residence halls. And that's just not, we haven't seen that here. So we kind of have to choose from different sectors, but that gives us the opportunity. In the US, there's kind of one career path, but here you get the chance to really, again, create a blank canvas for the professionalization of the sector to figure out what's the best thing for the customers and what's the best thing for our businesses as well. So, Gunter, I noticed we met a hall coordinator today. And so can you talk a little bit about the staff that you employ in your residence?
Well, in nearly each of our dorms, we have a technician who is responsible for the house. I think it's very important. What we do is that the house always looks nice. So if there is any problem, for example, a repair or something like that, we got the information from the students, and then we try to work it out as soon as possible. And that's also the reason why our houses, you saw the one in Molkereistraße, finished 17 years ago, is still in a very good shape. So we are not the owner, that's also important. We are not the owner of neither of the houses. So in Austria, normally Genossenschaft, a cooperative, a building cooperative, builds it for us. That's also very convenient for us because they are also non-for-profit. So that's good for us, good for the students, and we are also a non-profit organization, so that's very convenient then for the student. And we behave like the house would belong to us. We have a contract of 30 or 40 years because we want to have the house for the near future. And yeah, I think that's also very important, and students see that if they have any problem, we try to solve it very soon. And we try to be very open-minded. Even each year we ask all the students moving out what they liked, what they disliked, and we try to improve each year. So there is a Fragebogen, a questionnaire, thank you. And then around 1,000 people asked this questionnaire. That's quite a big sum. And then we tried to act. For example, we had a very old student dorm, which that does not belong to us, which had no internet, for example, 10 years ago. It was unbelievable for us to have these places there anymore, because internet is the most important point. More important than hot water.
It is on the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs now, absolutely. I also want to switch gears a little bit and talk about kind of the three prominent letters that I think many of our organizations are discussing, and that's ESG. So I'm going to make you make a choice now, panelists. Of the three letters, which do you think is the most important right now for you and your organization, and also for the sector?
Well, I think for the sector on the short term, it's definitely the E, as we are currently in an environment which will provide challenges within the next 24 months, for sure. The S is also relevant, more on a mid to long term basis. The G, depending on what you surmise under this, is more relevant for those who might have a global reach and less for those with a local reach. But I think if I look at, again, the E, and if you split the all-in rent currently in what is your basic rent and what comes on top for utilities and services, I think, coming to the question that we have earlier, we need also to be creative and proactive on which services we really need to provide, and which services students are really willing to pay for, and what they can afford going forward. Because if I look at let's say, the typical international student in London is a different type of international student than the one in Leipzig. And if I look at rental levels in Germany, even Munich, which is the most expensive spot for a student in Germany, is cheaper than Barcelona. And those of us who have rolled out their concepts focusing on the icing on the cake will come to an end because this number of people that can afford 1,000 euros plus as international students or mobile students, this is not in an infinitive group, and we have seen a lot of retrend to domestic and also to Erasmus students in Germany, and here the ceiling is far more in reach than in other regions around Europe, and we need to reflect this going forward. And I see this is then something which falls more in the S type, because for sure we're in for making profits. We're not a non-profit organization, but we also have a mission which we have committed 2 years ago when we entered that business, and this also puts some responsibility on us. And my strong belief is young people, as they are growing younger, and as you see shifts in their behavior. Someone mentioned earlier that the gap 15 years ago was smaller than it is today. My feeling is there's a strong focus on having a home-like atmosphere, having community, and having interaction with peers. And that does not necessarily imply that it needs to be posh, that it needs to have indoor pools, that it needs to have whatever it takes, a set of amenities that is visible in student accommodation if you tour around Europe. And 100 euros more or less per month, and you operate in Leipzig, you operate in other places, 100 euros is an accountable amount, and I'm fascinated with your concept in Copenhagen, which is completely different from what is the local layout, and which leads to the fact that you have 90% internationals on your schemes, while the locals have 90% domestic, but as said, I strongly believe that this is not an infinite model to be rolled out, and this we need to take into consideration whilst we think about defining our strategies going forward, embracing energy efficiency plus our social contribution to the sector.
I think that goes to what you were saying earlier, Patty, about customer segmentation and making sure we understand not just the present, but the future. Harold, E, S, or G?
My life is easy. We've got Herbert for the E. So I just need to focus on the and governance and transparency. I think it is a must-have. It's becoming more important. But I think I always turn it around. In 10 years' time, what of your student experience will you remember? And for me, that's why the social part is so important. And at a time where there's so much division, I'm always having these thought experiments. What if the Russian president and the Ukrainian president would have been in the same dorm together and cooked dinner together? Our world would be a little bit different. And I think that's why the social aspect, the social well-being, the interaction, that's why this is so important. And actually that is our mission, because I think, as with Günther, what will people remember? The party room, maybe the kitchen. So that's why I think the social aspect is the key thing for me, and working on that.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. So we actually had our first base camp marriage a
Yeah.
couple of years ago. So
you
it's
got kids already?
from Copenhagen, actually. So we had two residents who lived in one of our communities, and they actually got married, and they wanted to come back and do a ceremony or party in the building. So I think that really we are changing lives. I know that sounds cheesy, but it is true. It is true. So I want to be conscious of time, actually. So we can probably take one question from the audience, and then we have a final closing question as well. So does anyone in the audience have a question? Oh, perfect. Great. So I think one of the, this was mentioned a bit earlier, right, about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the impact on not only on the student living sector, but on the students themselves. And so I'd love to hear from the panelists about what you're seeing, what on-the-ground impact you've seen. We've seen some of the data around inbound and outbound student mobility, but what are you seeing in your communities? What do you hear people talking about? What's the kind of word on the street around this with the impact that we're seeing? Günther, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, the ÖAD has two offices abroad. One is in Shanghai and one is in Lemberg. So we have a very good connection to Lemberg, live right now. I was there twice. It's a city like Vienna, a little bit smaller, but you feel like in Vienna, in Lemberg. And now our staff there is in Vienna, and they organize all these students coming from the Ukraine to Vienna, and we accommodate now 26 of them, and we offer at the moment all our places to students. We have at the moment 120 students from Russia and 80 from the Ukraine in our dorms, and up to now there are no problems at all. That's very good. And if they have problems with paying their rents, and so we say, if you do not have get your money at the moment, it's no problem at all. You can pay later and so on. So we have to be as flexible as possible. That's what we are doing right now.
I think the situation in the Ukraine has really just highlighted the depth of the businesses that we run. Again, I think when we look at it from an investment perspective, it's quite easy to be very, I suppose, quite cold about it all. But really, when we're running buildings that, the operators are running buildings and people own buildings, where people they'll live, they'll die potentially, and it is a fact of what goes on. There will be creation of relationships, there will be destruction of relationships, and people bring all sorts of things in and out of the buildings, and I think that just highlights really the kind of depth of what an operational business needs to do. And I think we're still, from an investor perspective, still understanding what operational businesses really do, and actually what makes a good operational business and what makes a not so good one. And I think being able to take steps to make sure that the residents who are from areas of conflict feel safe, and that they have somewhere that they can talk to people about their family situation. Because it may be that they're not concerned about themselves, they may be concerned about other people. You know, I think the best environments are where they feel safe and there are people there who empathize, and that's another level. You don't get that if you're investing in offices or warehouses or something like that, you know. And so I think that just shows, you know, the real, I suppose, how this sector is so integrated in community and why it is so important.
Yeah, I think it also highlights some of the complexities of our organizations, because you can have a conversation at 9 a.m. about the kind of enterprise risk of the conflict, right? And what does that mean from an investor perspective, from an energy perspective? And then at 2, have a different conversation about, you know, a student who shows up in the office and doesn't know how they're going to pay their rent, right? Or students who share a kitchen together, right? We also have had staff, right? So our employees are impacted by this, whether they are of Ukrainian descent and they have family in Ukraine, or just the fact that it's a 24/7 news cycle. And so I think that's a really important thing to highlight around what we're seeing and how this really impacts the whole of the organization, not just the bottom line. I'm not sure, Rainer, if you're seeing the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. We run a scheme in Prague, and we have huge populations from Ukraine and Russia there. So far, no frictions, for God's sake. But we try to ease their situation to the extent possible, making them more flexible on who cannot pay rent, communicating with family. Yeah, that's, let's say, as you rightly say, that are the issues that you have on the ground on an hourly basis. Yeah, looking at a more, let's say, a global universe from an investor's perspective. It's for sure interest rates, inflation, attractiveness of the sector compared to others, and last but not least, what will be the economic trail that will affect Europe in the next 2 years as a consequence of the overall situation. And all these factors together keep us, I wouldn't say up all night, but yeah, it keeps us busy.
Great. So we have one more. I just want to end with kind of one question for everyone here, and that is, if you were to use one word to describe the state of student living today, what word would you use? We did not rehearse this one.
we didn't rehearse at all.
Happiness.
Happiness, fantastic.
I'd just say it's intriguing.
Okay, good. Yeah.
After 10 years, I still feel it's still fascinating.
Fascinating, yeah.
I struggled with one word only, but it's the future.
Yeah, I think the word I would use is potential, right? That's the word that I would use. Good. Great. So as Kellyanne said, if you are joining us online, if you have one word that you would use to describe the state of student living, please share online, also in the audience here as well. So, very good.
Yeah, I actually did have a question.
Oh, perfect. Great. Fantastic.
You guys are smashing time. You've got 10 minutes.
Oh, that's great. I thought we were ending at 5:15. Sorry.
You guys spoke a lot about kind of the bricks and mortar and kind of what what kind of makes the kind of living experience as such. It'd be really interesting to hear about changes that are happening in terms of like your policy, your internal policy, your training of staff to be able to kind of support those students in those buildings, especially post-COVID with the war that's going on, but also we've got a really conscious cohort that are, you know, that mental health is not open speaking about mental health, some do. I'm more happy to talk about gender preferences and LGBT communities, etc. So it'd be good to hear about kind of where the shifts are and trends in those sectors.
Yeah, so the question was about the shifts and trends and kind of what we're seeing with student needs around well-being, mental health. How are we preparing our property teams and operations to handle that? Would anyone like to kick that off?
I probably just more from a holistic perspective, not being an operator, but we're starting to work with more platforms now that kind of have, I suppose, wellness and mindset at the core of what they're doing, and kind of being built into the fibre of the real estate, so it can be operated in that way. So it's not a kind of, you're not taking, I suppose, a cookie cutter building and then trying to overlay those values into the building. The values are the core values of how you want to operate, and that fit through the fibres through the whole policy about how you treat staff, how the experience people are going to have in that building are from the design phase all the way through. So we're starting to see a real kind of evolution in that, I'd say. I think as well, you've always got to have the balance between, my experience is that the investors will always say it's about the bottom line. The property managers will say it's about the customer at any cost. You've got to be able to sort of balance that out. The key thing for operators, and I think where businesses are getting much better, is keeping those feedback loops from all across the spectrum. All the way from customer to management to investor, and all the way back down again, so that there's empathy across all of that. Because then I think if you can build a business that has that kind of empathy, so people can empathise with the customers, but they can also empathise with the people who are having to run the buildings. Actually you're creating a very sustainable building in that sort of sense.
What we do is we ask our students what they like, so that's, I think, very important. Then when there is a new student dorm in Austria, or when I'm in the UK or in Germany, I always look up their new student dorms, so get ideas from others. And what is for us very essential, that's the environmental point of view, but I think the best is to learn from others. So to see all, I visited a student hotel. I think we had at the beginning 30 places, also at Milestone, for example. So when Milestone was opened, I was there. So to see what others do, and to get own ideas, but also to have some ideas from others. I think that makes sense.
And I think, the last 2 years were, if you tell somebody, hey, your next 2 years will have a pandemic, then you have a war, your people will move out, and it is very turbulent times. So I think for resident managers in the schemes, it has been a very tough time. For me, this was the very clear point when the industry, when it became clear that you need a professional industry. Because I know what Gary and the team has done in terms of talking to the Red Cross during the pandemic to ensure there's food supply for the 350 people in that house. You couldn't do that if you're a single site operator where the developer built something, hired a trainee, sent them in and say, you run the house. You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that if you're a landlady renting out the spare room somewhere. So I think that has changed the industry quite a lot. It has become much more professional, and dealing with things you would have never thought of. It's like, but I think in the long run, and that brings me back to my favorite S, that's the key thing. You have a better social experience then.
Yeah, I think some of the things that we're seeing is, we continuously review our policies to make sure that they are up to date, particularly when we have new properties coming on. I think that's a really important piece. And it's really, actually in the last few weeks, we've really had a conversation around how do we continue to double down on training across all of our properties, and also training in person, right? We've done a lot of things online with Teams meetings, but there is a value to getting people in a room to have them talk about their experience. Some of the things that we're seeing are around re-emphasizing around crisis training, right? And anything from a building flood to a fire to sexual assault to mental health and suicidal ideation. And there's a lot of great external providers out there who can help with that. I'm a big proponent of mental health first aid. So that's something that we're trying to make sure that is rolled out across our organization. So it's really about, going back to what you said, the human aspect of that. Because these people, they need a bed, they need a place to sleep. But if they, if they can't function If they can't go to their school, if they can't go to their job, then they can't pay our rent, right? So we need to take care of the people who take care of us. How much time do we have? You have 10 minutes, but if you want 5 minutes. 5 minutes, fantastic, great. So I think one of the things that I would love to ask the group is, we've talked all about the things that we should be doing, the things that we are doing, the things that we can be doing. What do you think is something that we should stop doing as a sector?
You didn't prepare that either. I love it.
We're a very efficient group, so.
I think, and Rainer, we spoke about that as well, I think the private sector has very much expanded across Europe and focused on the premium segment. With what I see, and I think you guys mentioned it as well, if I'm thinking interest rates, if I'm thinking yields, if I'm thinking energy costs, I think the affordability of that product and being even more precise what you need. Maybe you don't need this super gym or super swimming pool. Maybe it is the Molkereistraße. I love the word. It means dairy farm. It was the old dairy place. Maybe the dairy place park is sufficient, and I think that's sometimes this a little bit less could be more longer term.
Completely agree with what Harald said. If you take Germany, for example, 3 million students, deduct those who stay with the parents, you're at roughly 2 million. We have 60,000 PBSA beds. There's a long way to go for the sector to grow, but you need to take into consideration this is not all the top 10 affordability bucket. There's something below. And there is a huge gap between what we all currently do, or what the sector currently does, and what the non-profit organizations, the Studentenwerke, offer as regards quality and product. And the big challenge lies between those two poles.
Yeah, I think for me, I think we need to stop talking so much about cost and really start to talk about value. I think this is something that's really important and goes to what both of you said before about what is valuable. When we talk about well-being programs or resident experience programs, they often talk about what is this going to cost us, right? But what is the value that it adds, I think, is a really important piece.
Yeah, I think that's. We've been saying that for a long time. I think is understand. Value doesn't just mean cheap, does it? I think one of the things, and James's slides actually talk to this a bit, and we've got some colleagues who've got some wider research coming out on the residential towns about this, is that probably stop thinking that actually the main capital cities are the answer as well. The kind of what we would probably call tier 2, tier 3, B, C cities globally, not just around Europe, are some of the most undersupplied cities of good quality accommodation. And they also have some of the best universities at them. And I think, sometimes the accommodation doesn't get built out in these towns and cities because they're not glossy enough. And maybe the board sitting on, the 80th floor in New York goes, where's Regensburg? Where the hell's that? What's in Reagan? Then they look at it and go, it's 100,000 people. No, just do Munich. Munich and Frankfurt. And then, so the capital doesn't flow into those cities. So they,
more than 50 breweries.
So breweries. So I've got to do it by breweries rather than,
Let's invest.
Yeah. You see, I'm learning all the time.
Customer segmentation.
Yeah, but I think, really, if, from a sustainability perspective, a success perspective, and really kind of trying to focus on undersupplied markets, thinking outside of those main capital cities that are where a lot of the investors have typically invested before, I think is really important. So that because when you start boiling down to it, I think there was something like 30 cities in Germany that have more than 20,000 students. And they're all incredibly investable cities. You might not build an office block there, and you might not build a massive logistics shed, But you look at the quality of the universities and you look at the quality of the accommodation in those cities and you think, Christ, actually, you could put a milestone there, you could put a TSH there or anything, and those rooms would fly.
Well, what I think is building passive houses or nearly zero energy houses should be the standard.
Thank you. All right, and yeah, okay. Well, that concludes our panel. Thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for listening, and we appreciate it. Thank you, panelists. Thank you guys for participating.
Me and Harold sharing mics. If he's got COVID, I'm not going to be happy. Okay, what an absolutely fantastic session that was. It's been a really fabulous day to be here with you all, and I'm really proud and happy that you came all the way here to share this experience with us. And thank you to those at home who have also been tuning in as well. So I just kind of want to take a minute for us to reflect on everything that's been said on the stage, everything from the data to the kind of real meaningful talks about where the future of the sector is going to be going. And it is an amazing opportunity for us as a community to kind of come forward and shape what is the future for our sector. So what I would like to do is I would like to invite the sponsors up first to say thank you for helping shape this event. So Glide, please come up. And Greystar, please come up. Hi, Carolina. So I just really quickly wanted to ask you guys one takeaway from today, okay? One takeaway from today and why it's important for us all to be in the room and why you decided to sponsor this event.
Well, you know what? When you guys were describing with one word the future, well, student living, it's really interesting that every single word was implying the future. So, fascinating, intriguing. It's something curious about it, and it's actually something to look forward to. The fact that we actually discussed everything what we discussed today, even the situation in, Ukraine, is really important in the way that we actually look to how to solve these challenges in any way, from, basic stuff, utilities, call it, or the well-being of the students, whoever is staying in our residence, for operators, whoever we are providing the services to. And this is the reason why we're here. We like to share our kind of little bit contribution to this, for this to happen, and to be participating here, and also to hear from you guys and to learn everything, what your experiences are. In this is mainly it. Exactly. And obviously, looking forward to providing solutions that help you guys. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think our reason why we also sponsor this event is, number one, we couldn't agree more that it's something different to come together. And since we are part of the game as Greystar, we have our own student housing, other buildings. We will open one in Vienna. Next time, please come to see this building. It will open in June this year. But yeah, it's important to see us in person, to see old friends, to meet new friends, to meet the first time in person, like the two of us. So it's really, really important. And the other thing I think I took away, it's really that there is, and I like the last part with the tier 2 cities or number B. I try to convince my boss to go to Hanover, since I'm from there, but he still doesn't want to do it. He's still focusing on Munich, Frankfurt, and Berlin. And I think, there's so much more that we can do, and especially in Germany as well. So, look forward to go the way forward with all of you and meet you again soon. Very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to come back on stage after to get a photo. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So just before I invite all the speakers back on the stage, because yes, I'm going to do that too, I'm just going to let you know that in your emails there is a location for an after drinks, which we'll be walking over to. It's just down the road. It's 5 minutes. So please continue networking with each other. And you also get a free drink as well while you're there, so why not? Okay, so I would like to invite up Frank, Herbert, Frank, Gerrit, James, Harold, Gunther, Elizabeth, Paddy and Rainer, please. Please come up onto the stage. Yeah, I am quite tall. Okay, please give us a round of, please, and Aranima, please come on. Yeah, Aranima, who made the program today as well. Mel and Omar, will you also please join me? Mel, not happy. Come on. Scott as well. Yeah, sorry, Scott. Okay, please join me in thanking everybody who helped shape today's conversations yeah, carry on speaking and chatting and continuing to network with us after. But thank you so much to all of you. It's been a really fantastic day.